Alrighty, folks. So this is gonna be a relatively brief wrap-up of my review for the Burris XTR Pro 5.5 to 30 by 56 rifle scope. I've talked about in the past. If you've been following me for any length of time, you know that I generally like this scope. But a couple of different questions came up. And one of the questions that came up was a question of reticles. Burris offers a couple of SCR2 Mil reticles. The 0.2 mil radian based SCR2 Mil, which is in this scope, and the quarter mil radian, 0.25 mil radian based SCR2 quarter mil, I think that's what they call it, which is this guy. That's the original scope that I tested. This is the scope that I got directly from Burris. And one of the questions always in my mind, are these people cherry picking scopes for? Now, I've known the guys at Burris for a long time. I'm generally pretty friendly with them. And I am quite confident that they're smart enough to not do that because, if I catch you cherry picking scopes for me, if it's not a true production scope, hand-picked sample, something like that, we're going to have problems. So, since I wanted to look at a different reticle anyway, I procured this guy. This one I just went and purchased from Optic. And this one, my purpose really was to check the second sample, randomly selected sample, compared to the one that I got directly from Burris. And while I'm at it, evaluate the two reticles side by side. Again, this is not sufficient quantity for proper statistical analysis, but anecdotal evidence is still evidence. As far as optical performance, they two are almost identical. So the one I had originally is slightly better on high magnification, above 25, and the one I bought separately is very slightly better at mid-range, but it is close. What is really notable is that their control of flare is nearly identical, and flare control that's consistent from sample to sample is one of the indications of a reasonably well thought out optical design. I have a sunshade on this one. I've tested it with and without the sunshade. I've moved it back and forth. I didn't pull out the sunshade. It came in a box. With the second scope, did not make a huge amount of difference, and the two scopes performed nearly identical in terms of flare control. There are different types of flare. There's flare for light that comes in through the objective. And right now it's getting a little bit dark. The sun is setting. It's not fully set yet, but it's behind the clouds, so you don't see it. 10 minutes ago, it was quite bright here. The sun was low and coming in from right over there. And I did two things. One is that I moved things around to see what a light coming into the objective will do. Another thing I did is that I shot with these glasses on. And one of the more difficult types of flare when you are facing the sun is the light that hits your sunglasses, reflects and gets into the eyepiece and does potentially bad things to the image. And to my considerable satisfaction, both scopes performed extremely similarly, and both scopes performed quite well. I have seen other samples of XTR Pro that looked relatively similar to me, but this is the first time I had two of them side by side with nobody waiting on me. As you can see, there's nobody else at the range. And I was able to spend a solid hour and a half with them side by side, going back and forth. This one is sitting on my 6.5 PRC Stack Pursuit, which is by the wonderful gun I need to do a video on. And this one is sitting on the rifle I'm planning to use in competition at NRL Hunter. Normally I've got a tangent theta on it, so I pulled it off and I put this scope on since I wanted to have practice with this rifle anyway, and I'm familiar with it. It was a good test bed. In terms of Eyebox, how easy the scope is to get behind, they are extremely similar to each other. At first, I thought that they were not, and then it turned out that the way I mounted them, one was a little bit, well, the new one was a little bit closer to the eye than it should be. I went through the adjustment range to see how performance starts dropping off as we get closer to the edges. Again, performance is very, very similar. Are there slight differences? Yes, well within what I would expect in terms of sample variation. In terms of click quality, the scope I got directly from Burris is actually a bit worse than this one. But this one is a relatively early production, and they're probably more consistent now than when they just started making them. The scope I purchased is relatively recent. They both have pretty good clicks. Once again, it's not attention data. They're not as good as March, but they are quite good. If you want an almost the same scope, maybe a little bit more looked over, with a better turret, you should be looking at Steiner T6XI 5 to 30 by 56. It's the same basic design with this, assembled in the same basic place, but with a better turret, right? So the Steiner T6 turret is legitimately better than this in terms of feel, and it locks and does some other things. But in terms of bang for the buck, it's very, very hard to argue against these. They run typically in a 2000 to 2200 range. You can relatively often find them discounted. They do work excellent. All right, wind is picking up, so I apologize if you start getting wind noise. It was none when I started this video. What else can I tell you? Not a ton. I placed this scope on my list of recommendations, and this is my reference standard for $2,000 precision competition long-range tactical rifle scope, and I have not seen anything yet to dissuade me. I can think of a couple of similar price scopes that are comparable in performance. I have not seen anything that I thought was clearly better. To remind you, what I call a reference standard is not necessarily the best of the category, but all the way at the top and something I like enough to keep on hand. There are scopes, for example, that are very good, but I don't like the reticle. If I don't like the reticle, I'm not going to keep it. This guy is staying because I do like the reticle. Speaking of the reticles, quarter mil versus 0.2 mil based reticle. In actual shooting, I'm seeing very little difference. I'll be honest with you. The look is very similar. The quarter mil reticle is not quite identical. It's a little bit more like a grid reticle, the way the tree is done. The 0.2 is slightly more open between the lines, but then the 0.2 mil hash marks on the side of the look. So it's very slightly more crowded in some way, very slightly less crowded in other ways. The center of the reticle looks very, very similar to me. When I was sighting in and trying to adjust and doing some tracking and holding for wind, for me, 0.2 is a little bit more natural, simply because I have so much mileage with 0.2 mil right in base gun. But they are pretty close. And after I go and shoot with a quarter mil reticle scope for a couple of days, it's becoming fairly natural. Where I do lean toward the 0.2 base or design is if I have to use the reticle for range finding, right? Splitting 0.2 into 0.1, I seem to be making it seems to be a little bit more natural, but honestly, that's a comparatively small error to make, because usually where you have the most errors in estimating the size of the object. Otherwise, both reticles work. As far as competition reticles go, these are the two designs I like quite a lot. The one real complaint I have, and that goes for both reticles, the tree, grid, whatever you want to call it, extends down below the primary aiming point by 20 milliradian. Generally speaking, I've never needed that much. But if you really need it, sure. To see the whole thing, you need to go down to about 10 power. These are relatively quite wide field of view scopes. And when you go on 10 power, the tree on the bottom there, toward the edges, distortion, by the way, is very well controlled, like the scopes. It gets a little bit thin. If I were Burris, I would have added something a little bit more prominent toward the bottom half of the tree if they are intent on being used. I would bet that of the people who buy these scopes with this reticle, less than 1% have ever used the tree for more than 10 milliradian. Take that for what it is. Beyond that, one of the interesting things you can tell from a reticle extending all the way out to the edge of the field of view, if there are any distortion issues, you can easily see that based on how the reticle lines look. And distortion with these scopes is pretty nicely controlled. Overall, as far as optical performance of the XTR Pro, I have to say it's an extremely well balanced design. Does it compete with $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 scopes? No, it's not quite as good. But I think this is more or less where the sweet spot is. Couple of $1,000s. This is a full-featured scope. There is red and green illumination, focuses down close enough, a good magnification range for long-range and precision shooting. Very serviceable turret. I can reset the turret completely without tools if I'm so inclined. So versus this turret comes off. On this one, there is a lever. I open the lever, reset it. I'm good to go. I don't need. You can, if you want, something permanently fixed, you can use a tool for that. I have not really needed it. I have not really needed it. It works perfectly fine in a completely toolless manner. So it's a $2,300 scope with a toolless turret. The windage I keep covered, but you can run it uncovered. The tweaks seem to be quite good. Where exactly the magnification range the scope is fully optimized is it's getting dark. It's hard to tell with certainty. In terms of the most balanced performance with this scope, I'm seeing in a 16 to 20 power range, which works very, very well for me. So I somehow end up with most of my shooting done between 12 and 15, and if I have reasonably decent atmospheric conditions, I will dial it back up to 20, sometimes 25. With this scope, the one that I've had for quite a long time now, so I have a lot of mileage with it. I have to admit that I've only dialed up all the way up when looking for bullet holes and looking for environmental conditions. I've done some shooting on high magnification for shits and giggles, but only shooting paper, sighting in, that kind of stuff. By and large, I only use the high magnification to look at conditions, and it looks quite good. With many scopes, you have clear image quality deterioration, high magnification ranges, and here I see very little of it. If you want to look to where the sweet spot of magnification range runs out, it's above 25. But the drop off between the sweet spot performance and 30 power, I can see it, but it's not something that would bother me in actual shooting. And I only really see it when the light starts to get challenging. When I have nice soft light, no real issues. All in all, the conclusion of this is that it doesn't look like I got cherry-picked sample. In some ways, the scope I bought suffers a little better, primarily in terms of the turrets. Other controls, elevation turret, other controls are about the same. And this scope stays on my list of recommendations, and this scope stays in my inventory for the foreseeable future. Thank you all. If you have any other questions about XTR Pro, you know where to find me. The best way to contact me is through my website, darklordofoptics.com. But if you leave a comment under this video, I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. This video is recorded just a little bit before Thanksgiving, so if you guys do not hear from me before, happy Thanksgiving 2024. I have a lot to be thankful for, and I hope most of you. Thank you.